Om Shanti. So welcome to the Gita Decoded. This is the third session on this subject, and I am not going to repeat what happened in the previous two sessions, but we're going to move forward. So what this means is that I'm going to be showing you two of the television episodes that have been prepared on the Gita, and these will be episodes number 6 and 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 you missed, but you can catch them. We have something brand new which will be sort of officially launched in the coming weeks, called rajayoga.tv. It's a website with on-demand television programs, and they're different series. So one of the series is the Gita Decoded. And so when it gets launched, which will be about 3 weeks from now, you could just go on that website, www.rajayoga.tv. Very easy to remember. And it has many different types of TV series. Now, as you know, the knowledge that we are studying in Brahma Kumaris is also called the Gita knowledge, yeah? And I wonder if you could just give me a show of hands. How many of you have actually read the Gita, the Lokik Gita? Okay, so quite a few of you. And I think it's very interesting for all of you to see the relationship between that Gita and what Baba calls the real Gita. As you know, from time to time in the Murli, Baba mentions that the speaker of the Gita is thought to be Krishna, but in fact it is incorporeal Shiv Baba. And the main message of the Gita is what we call Shrimat, which is very simply, consider yourself to be a soul, and remember the one incorporeal Supreme Soul. So this episode 6 and 7 are really the second chapter of the Gita. I think it goes into the third. So the first chapter of the Gita is basically giving you the overview of the Great World War. And we know from today's Murli that, the Third World War is expected, and every cycle it does take place, and it involves not just only the conventional nuclear weapons, but all other forms of war are there, and together with that, natural calamities, civil war, diseases, famine, so many things, which are also called, I think, the 4 horses of the apocalypse. You must have heard about that. So the Gita is set within the Mahabharata, and the Mahabharata means literally the Great World War. And the Great World War is such a thing that is absolutely essential in order for the world to be reset so that we can go home, come back, start again. And so one of the things that is quite clearly there in the Mahabharata is that you have to allow everything to reach its extreme. And of course what we have within ourselves is a natural inclination to try to prevent things from going so totally wrong, right? And so this natural inclination has to be overcome. and you will find it arising within you. And especially in your immediate world, one of the statements that we hear very often is, this should not be happening, right? Or they should not be doing this, or someone should do something about this. And at this particular time in the drama, it is the time where we have to allow everything to reach its extreme. So that's something very new, very different, which you will probably not agree with at all, but consider it. Now, the second chapter of the Gita is when we begin to hear God speaking and explaining why Arjuna has to go and kill all his relatives, because the problem for Arjuna is that if you are connected to someone by blood, well, honor dictates that you cannot kill them no matter what. And so you have this conflict of ideologies between the conventional wisdom, the conventional morality, which everybody is very knowledgeable about. And then you have the instruction from God, which goes totally against the instructions of people. And of course, in the Murli, you hear the expression Shrimat, Parmat, and Manmat, right? You know these expressions, yeah? And generally speaking, Shrimat is whatever Shiv Baba says, and Parmat is whatever everybody else says, and Manmat is whatever you decide. That's how it's generally translated. But you can look at it a little more subtly as well, which is quite interesting to do. And of course, Shrimat is what Shiv Baba says, bearing in mind that anything that is non-physical is much more real than something that's physical. And so to identify yourself with the non-physical, the self, the soul, to draw your resource from incorporeal Shiv Baba and not from people, places and things, this is new. So I'm going to go ahead and play you this episode, which is a conversation between myself and a person who is interviewing me, whose name is Magla Pillai, and she is a judge. And it's quite interesting because Baba had said that the points that Baba says about the Gita may ultimately go to court. And that he had invited the jurists among BKs to prepare such dialogue between the people who are the lawyers, the judges, and then those who are explaining what Baba is telling. So we have a little bit that sort of dialogue set up. So what I thought we would do is we will listen to the episode 6 now, and then we will have a conversation about it. We have another microphone here, so you're welcome to come up with your questions, your comments, and then around 11.
A very warm welcome to episode 6 of Gita Decoded. Sister Denise has been sharing her wisdom and insight into the all-important chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna addresses Arjuna for the first time, gives him courage, gives him wisdom, and also shares with him the deep secrets of things like the story of immortality, reincarnation, etc. We've just started chapter 2, and so we're continuing with it because we were not able to go through the entire chapter in one episode. So Sister Denise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I think we are now on plus minus page 31 of my translation. So the message that Arjuna receives is that which he considers to be a sin, in other words, to kill, to destroy, is actually indestructible. So this is the message that he's already received. And Sister Denise, why is it we regard that which is immortal as mortal? What is it in the human psyche that takes things at face value? Why is the truth not obvious to us? Why do we need God to tell us this?
There are two reasons. One of them is that the soul has lost power to such an extent that the natural ability to be aware of the self as a soul is gone. And what happens when that leaves is that you become conscious of yourself as a material object. You identify with your body, you become what we call as body conscious, and then whatever you perceive through your five senses, you say that is real, which means the first thing is your own body, the second thing is other people's bodies, and the third thing is other physical realities, cultural surroundings, and so on. The second thing is that people have forgotten. One is in a state of forgetfulness. And so you're kind of, in a way, groping in the dark. And so whatever you can feel, you say, that's what it is, and you interpret it with insufficient capacity to perceive. And so the spiritual consciousness is an awakened awareness where you can perceive something over and above its physical form. You can see the thing which is real, which is the being, and you're not deluded by the physical aspect.
I find the wording on page 31 very interesting, where it is said that the highest calling for a warrior is what is called righteous battle. Okay, what is righteous battle? And Sister Denise, on page 31, the reader is introduced for the first time to caste duty. Okay, what does caste duty mean?
The first thing is the just war. And if you look at the political environment that we're in at the present time in the 21st century, you will see that there are different military powers who seek to justify military activity as the pursuit of a just war. And so there are various criteria for a just war, and I think this goes back to this idea of the highest duty of a warrior is to fight where war is required. If you look at the Hagakure, which is the scripture for the Japanese samurai, there you have a lot of description of what the warrior has to be doing. And the warrior, if you look at the human society, and then you're asking about the caste duty, which is absolutely connected, of course, the traditional castes are the Brahmins, who are the priest caste, and then you have the warriors, who are the rulers. Then you have the business community, the Vaish, and then you have the lowest caste, the peasants, the workers, the Shudras, and then you have all sorts of subcastes in between. So traditional society is like that. And traditional society carried on more or less undisturbed until about the 18th century, where the Industrial Revolution occurred in, the 19th century, the 1830s in Europe, where science began. And then conventional science was really formulated, say, in the 1920s. Then you have new science, which is formulated around the 1970s, all of which took place, the First World War, the Second World War, everything changed, and the traditional society disappeared. In India, there is still traditional society in the agricultural areas, but more and more there's urbanization. And as soon as you come into the urban world, you're dealing with industrial developments, and there's a change in the whole arrangement of the politics. You have Gandhi, who raised the idea of we should outlaw untouchability, we should emancipate women. All of these modern political ideas are very much in opposition to traditional society, whereas the kind of the religious, spiritual component is very, very fixed in traditional society and is trying to bring that onto the modern world, which doesn't work very well at all, and it ends up being, in a way, tremendously in opposition to what we call human rights. So there's a big problem, and this is where you have this description of the destruction of Dharma. So, Dharma, in one sense, can refer to the age-old traditional system where everything works nicely as long as the human population is really small, as long as there's plenty of agricultural land, and so on and so on. But as time went on, all of this stopped happening. So a person lost their identity in that, because in the society of India, you cannot shift your caste. Whatever caste you're born into, that's that, and you will do what your father did before, and you will follow, and no ifs, ands, or buts. It's not possible. So then people grapple with this, and when you're looking at the Gita as a modern day relevant piece of advice or literature, in a way, Srimad means the highest advice, how to be a good quality human being. Then in that case, we will not look at caste as what you're born into, but there's another interpretation of caste, which is what caliber of human being are you in terms of quality. And that especially in terms of how you relate to God, how you relate to the principles and ideals of spirituality. So for example, a Brahmin by caste is one thing. They may or may not follow the ideals of what it means to be a Brahmin, but when you interpret it according to karma, if a person is performing karma of highest purity, then that would be a Brahmin type of person, very sattvic, pure behavior, pure lifestyle. Purity is the main characteristic of a Brahmin. And their relationship with God is completely in tune with, in alignment with, and absolutely following the footsteps of Brahma, you see, and Brahma is, in that sense, the instrument of creation. Usually Brahma is considered as part of the Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, Shankar, or Mahesh, or Shiva, and again there's a mixing of the incorporeal with the bodiless. Of course, incorporeal and bodiless mean the same thing, but if you look at the Trinity as the first creation of the Creator, then Brahma means the instrument for creation, Vishnu the instrument for sustenance, and Shankar the instrument for destruction. So this then referring to the acts of God. And so according to Brahma Kumaris' knowledge, Brahma is a person who is taught by God how to be an ideal human being, because creation is done through that. Creation, I go back to a phrase that I had mentioned earlier. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But what did God say? And basically, what God says is follow a life of purity. Perform pure karma, because this is what is going to create a new world, a new cycle, a new civilization. And then Vishnu is the four-armed image, the perfected male and female, the couple, which is the ideal foundation of the sustained society of a future civilization. And then you see Shankar naked, referring to the state of becoming free from the delusions of identification with the body. You see, because the body means sense perception. Body consciousness means that you take the information through sense perception to be reality. So if you are a kshatriya, the warrior, you are constantly battling between what you know to be a better quality of life and then the power of sense perception to pull you away from actually following that. So that would be the warrior person who's constantly battling internally and striving but unsuccessfully. And then the merchant becomes the one who's constantly making deals, with God. That look, if I do just this much for you, then you can sort of, look after the shortfall in my spiritual effort. And of course, it doesn't work like that. But that's the next level down. And then the lowest level, the Shudra, means a person who is totally unable to be anything other than totally hedonistic and absolutely under the enthralled to the sense perceptions and doing negative karma all the time. So then your caste duty becomes something more like, well, what kind of person am I aspiring to be? And of course what we would say in Brahma Kumaris is, well, the best kind is the Brahmin, and so strive to be a good quality Brahmin, but bear in mind that there is some battling involved, so there'll be a little bit of kshatriya along the way. And beware of trying to do too much bargaining, because you're going to get distracted from the right thing. And bear in mind also that your personal weaknesses can get the better of you, and you have to be very vigilant and try all the time to absorb spiritual power through your meditation from the incorporeal Supreme Being, because this is going to enable you to rise above the lower chakras, the lower energies that pull you into negative emotions and inability to control your feelings. So we would interpret it a little bit more like that.
So Denise, has caste anything to do with the body?
In terms of how people have interpreted it, it depends on your birth, you see. And so, depending on what family you got born in, it is assumed that you're born into a family according to your karma of your previous birth. So if you're born into a lower caste, it's considered that, well, you did bad karma and that's why. And so you have to just deal with that. And if you're born in a high caste, then that means you must have done some good karma, so that's your reward. And so it's interpreted in a very bodily way. But at this time, we would say that that's not the best way to work with caste. It's rather better to look at caste in terms of what kind of karma, what standards of lifestyle do you live by, what principles do you live by, and that will indicate what quality of person you are and what caste you are in that sense.
Very interesting. Your answer was long, but very, very thought-provoking, I must say.
Thank you.
So Denise, the next part of the conversation that ensues between God and Arjuna is God issuing a very clear warning as to the consequences of Arjuna not taking up the battle. And he mentions the words are, thereupon having avoided your own duty and glory, you shall incur evil. Okay, and he goes on to say that you will lose your honor, and this is a disgrace that is worse than dying. That is a bitter pill to swallow, and if one is invested in Arjuna, in other words, where you start identifying with Arjuna, you think, you feel it.
Sure.
Okay, so take us through that.
Well, you know, there are three kinds of sins.
There is.
One is a sin of commission, where you do the wrong thing. The second one, which I think is being raised in this phrase that you're mentioning here, the sins of omission. You see, when a person doesn't do what they should do, certainly they will incur evil and they will incur sin and they will have to pay for that. You see, but many people, they don't really realize that avoiding what you have to do brings on the energy of sin. The third kind, which is something I think is only really talked about in Brahma Kumaris and not elsewhere, but I still think it's very interesting to consider it, and that is that when you take sorrow from some negative thing that someone has done to you, there also you incur sin. Because the highest way of action is to be able to endure and become neutral when somebody sins against you, you know. So, and if you don't, if you take it on, it contaminates your soul and thereby becomes another kind of sin. So this warning that God is giving...
Pause. Describe the last part again. If you're harmed in any way and you accept the sorrow of that, then what happens?
You know, somebody does something against you, what it very often will provoke in you is vindictiveness, the urge to take revenge. You will go over it again and again and again. There'll be resentment and so on. And this way of taking that poison in poisons you more. And it actually has the same effect as if you had done something wrong to somebody. But that means it becomes a sin. because you're contaminating the purity of yourself through your resentment, your vindictiveness, your desire to take revenge. It's not clean. And this is why the yogi has to have powers, and power of endurance, power of accommodation, make it possible for you to maintain your purity even in the face of someone trying to contaminate you. That is something that people don't really think about much, but in the practice of Raj Yoga that I do with Brahma Kumaris is very important, because if you don't realize that you're contaminating yourself, you'll be confused as to how come you're not progressing. It's because you're doing that third type of sin, and we can't do that. If you want to become the highest quality person, which is what this God as the teacher is teaching you to be at that level.
I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from the shock of what you just said. Okay, so Mr. Denise, the standards that have been laid down in the Bhagavad Gita and explained by you are incredibly, incredibly high. Is it within the purview of the viewer, I don't want to say average viewer, to achieve what you just said? You are speaking about somebody who's in the receiving end of punishment from life, and what is expected of the person in order not to perpetuate the sin, the karma, is to not take sorrow despite the fact that it's given to you. We're talking about physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, psychological pain. So you said it's coming to you, it's hit you, it knocked on you, it didn't knock on your door, it broke down your door, entered your home, contaminated you, got to you, and you what? Don't feel it. Is this possible?
It is possible.
By whom?
If you want to take maximum advantage, suppose there you are, you're just a basic person, and God comes knocking on your door and says, would you be interested in studying with me? Because if you do, I can teach you things that nobody knows, and through that you can become a most extraordinary person. So you could say, well, that sounds pretty interesting to me, what's involved? And then you gradually start to discover some of these things. But when you have the direct communion with the Supreme Being, soul to Supreme Soul, you take energy, you take power. And it's a lifetime process, no doubt. But what you experience, if you decide to do that, is that these things, from being a totally impossible ideal, they become progressively doable. And it's progressive because what you find when you do this is that you fail a lot of the time. But every time you fail, you get an opportunity to assess where you're weak, where you have insufficiently absorbed spiritual power, and you gradually start to actually become able to manifest those capabilities. So this we speak about in Brahma Kumaris as the cultivation, the development of virtues and powers. And then from being an ordinary person, you slowly become less and less ordinary, more and more extraordinary, and you experience within yourself that there is a sustainable change going on. Of course it takes time, it's slow, but it's real and it's lasting, and so it is so desirable.
Yeah. Desirable. That's not the adjective that comes to mind right now, but we'll stick to desirable.
All right.
Okay, so Sister Denise, God first gives Arjuna his company, then he gives him courage, and then wisdom. Is there a significance to that order?
Well, Arjuna is like any of us. We're just people. And yet, destiny has brought us to a point in time where there is this encounter between the soul in his completely ordinary condition and God, the Supreme Soul, and this combination, this, you can say, fusion of the two is an extraordinary opportunity in which you can become God-like. And this is why sometimes you can say this is the creative time. This is what the Gita is about. The Gita is about God taking a person who is a fine, upright human being, but not strong enough to actually live that way under any circumstances, and God will give you the teaching, give you the power, and actually make it possible for you to transcend your normal limitations. And I think this is the speciality of God. This cannot be done by a human being. But when a human being comes into connection and relationship with the Supreme Being, something happens which is most extraordinary. And I think that in so many ways what people would like, the quest, what it is to find that, when people speak of the Holy Grail, the quest for the Grail, the way I look at it, this is it. This is the Holy Grail that you drink from. You drink from this fountain of knowledge and nectar of immortality. There's so many expressions that you find across the different cultures which actually refer to this absorption in the human soul of what is within God, so that you transcend your limitations and you become something divine.
Okay, Sister Denise, on page 39, the reader is introduced for the first time to the law of karma. And I find it interesting that it's brought in at this juncture. And the words are, now hear it as it is applied in arduous practice. Yoke with this determination, Arjuna, you shall rid yourself of the bondage of karma. And so it comes immediately after the warning of what will happen to you and how you will lose your honor if you don't take up this fight. And the bondage of karma, that's very visual in the way it's expressed, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Well, you see, I think the operative word is arduous practice.
Ah, okay, so you're a line ahead. Go on.
It's really God saying to you, look, if you want to achieve what's achievable, you have to do it seriously. I compare it with somebody who decides to take up music or dance professionally, and they will go to a guru who will expect absolute obedience and surrender, so that that teacher can actually make that person into a highly skilled performer,
a virtuoso.
A virtuoso. So there you have to think about it. Do I want to do this at this level? And so you have to stop and think, well, what is my capacity? Well, I don't know. And so God is saying, look, I know your capacity better than you. If I'm offering this to you, it means you have a chance. So have full faith in yourself that since I'm God and I'm wanting to carry you forward at this level, you can take the risk to say, yes, let me give it a go. But then you have to be willing to go for the long haul, and you have to be willing to engage in pretty arduous disciplines with the understanding that God will take you to that level. So you have to really sit down with yourself and think, do you want to do this? Do you want this? And it's really a question of what do you want for yourself? And if you really want this, you can have it. If you don't really want it, don't really care, you want to do things at a simple level, well, that's good too. But it's like a step comes where God is saying, okay, we've reached this far, now, do you want to go for the PhD, or are you happy with just the bachelor's? You know, it's a little bit like that.
Okay, unfortunately we have to stop there, but Sister Denise, this subject of the bondage of karma is so riveting. I think it's necessary to take it up at the beginning of the next episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this episode. Sister Denise has shared some extremely deep aspects to spirituality, I think, which most of us have not considered before. I mean, I was quite shocked to hear that if you take on sorrow that's inflicted upon you by life, someone or something, and if you get hurt by it emotionally, then you are perpetuating your karmic account. You're not ending it, it's getting worse. That was a bit of a rude shock, but this was one of the many things that we learned today. And so I invite you to take that which you have heard today and use it as a mirror in your own life and ask yourself, how can you use this knowledge to your advantage? And I hope that this episode has helped you understand the depth and wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita deeper. Thank you so much for joining us, and goodbye.
Om Shanti. So I hope you enjoyed that. Did it make you think, oh, I wanted to see the earlier episodes? So you know what to do. Just wait for a little bit. It will be announced when it comes, and I think it'll be around the 3rd week of April. So, arduous practice or easy Raj Yoga? It's quite an interesting thing to ask yourself, because Baba often mentions how easy this is. And I remember one brother coming to me with deep sincerity saying, "Sister, tell me, what is easy about Raj Yoga?" And I think in a way, you know, it's easy on a physical level in terms of a comparison with Hatha Yoga. You don't have to sit yourself into a pretzel and stand on one toe for 10 years or something like this. And the hardship of the spiritual practices and fasting and endless chantings and all sorts of things that you have to do to yourself in order to get a couple of seconds of a vision or something. In that sense, it's easy. But Raj Yoga is really very serious. And are we, you can say, are we professional Raj Yogis, or are we just dabbling in it? Yeah, so, you know, if you dabble in something, you'll never really get very good at it. And I think that what a lot of people have been telling me is that we're really not satisfied with the level that we have achieved. Would you say that? So there is this feeling inside that I really would like to be further ahead than I am, and I'm not quite sure what I have to do in order to achieve that. And although, especially Daddy Janki keeps on telling us, sometimes we don't quite catch it, what she really is telling us. So anyway, my aim by doing these things, and there are other series of TV shows on the Raj Yoga TV which take up different aspects of our practice and go deeper into it so that we hopefully have more tools to be able to be more competent Raj yogis and with greater skill and sense of achievement. And I think there is a big gap between just going along and really doing it as it could be done. So I think part of my aim is to encourage you to consider that you have been selected by God, who does know what he's doing. And even though you may think, well, why me? You know, my next door neighbor would be perhaps a better choice. But it didn't happen like that. Of course, we are antiques, and antiques tend to be a bit worm-eaten and a bit broken, and you have to be careful with them. But there are not that many souls who used to be world-class Indian deity sovereigns, right? And that is really what we are identified as, you see. And so Shiv Baba says, you had done this in the previous cycle, and therefore it's possible for you to do it again now. All you have to do is show up and follow the instructions. But the instructions, while being very easy to say, be soul conscious, don't take sorrow. I mean, don't take sorrow. Have you tried that? It ends up as, I'm tolerating. Yeah. That's not called not taking sorrow. We really need to, I think, seriously think about powers and virtues, and move totally away from any form of finger wagging, either to oneself or to anybody else. Nothing to do with it. Baba says, truthfully, that if you take power from me, you will be empowered. So you are invited to do that. And so we really have to think about our yoga and do it as it could be done, as it should be done. And I think it's also very important that we develop this idea of being a solitary yogi. While we are in the context of the BK family and the classmates and all of this, but at the same time, each and every one of us is doing this independently, individually, and I think one of the most important messages that Daddy Janki often talks to us about is never make somebody else's behavior an excuse for you to stop coming to class, stop having Amrit Vela or any of these other things, you know, because that is the most stupid thing of all possible stupid things. But it's quite difficult because you take sorrow, you see. So, so this, I think, is a key, important piece of information that doesn't exist in any religion, and doesn't exist in any form of morality or ethics or value system. But it is there in Raj Yoga. We all know we shouldn't give sorrow. Whether we do it or not is another thing. But because it's new to not take sorrow, in the name of not taking sorrow, we generally take sorrow. And then we get into this what he calls waste thoughts. And as long as the soul performs waste thoughts, you can never take power. So it's a choice. Anyway, we've got another microphone here. We've got about a half an hour before I show you the next episode, so I would invite you to come along if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that that you would like to raise for discussion in this next half hour, then please come up. Yes. And please introduce yourself, your name and where you came from.
Hello. Shanti, this is Brother Ali from Australia, Melbourne. I had just a quick question with the caste the system that we was talking about. I was under the impression, or I guess the transcending part of it would be to break the caste system altogether and as emerge out to be as a Brahmin.
Not really. You're all Brahmins, right? But among BKs, some people are proper Brahmins. Some people are still fighting Maya unsuccessfully, or if you fight successfully, you fight to win, that's okay, that's Brahmin. You know, and if you're caught up in the imbalance of doing too much service and not enough yoga, that's very much the Kshatriya, the Vaishya, the businessman, busy, busy, busy. You know, Daddy Janki often says, how come you say you're busy? I am free. She's 100-year-old head of the organization, totally free. There's something in that. And then Shudra is really people who are, you know, secretly full of vices. You see, and that's among BKs. Forget about non-BKs. You know what I mean? So really the idea of the caste system and caste duty is ask yourself as a BK, what level of Brahmin am I? And get on with being a Brahmin, you see. And the social system, the Indian social system, the caste system, it is a context, it's a backdrop, you know, and there's nothing you can do about that, absolutely not. You can never try to change anything other than yourself. Okay?
Just on those lines, I was just under the impression, and you of course correct me if I'm wrong, but the focus would be not to go into expansion of whether I'm in this instant a Shudra or a Kshatriya or something, but just focus on transcending to be a Brahman.
No. You have to confront yourself and face yourself and be real with yourself, because otherwise you're dreaming. And the dreamy BKs is not very successful. You have to be real with yourself. What am I? And then if you see that you are saying one thing and doing something else, then you're a hypocrite. Don't do that. Be the same inside as outside. Real. Do not lie. And do not imagine that you're not being constantly assessed, both by Baba and by those BKs who all have the third eye, with which they can see exactly what you're doing. So, you know, serious personal work is what is recommended here. So just superficial, you will end up disappointed with yourself. So, and there are many who think that, yeah, we can be superficial, nicey, sugar and spicy, but you will be unable to prove to yourself or anyone else that God is teaching you. Okay, next person.
Okay.
I think...
Can I, just as another part to it?
I'll tell you what, let her have a chance and then you come back. You sit on that sofa and hold on, please. Is your mic on? Did you turn it off? Yes.
Hello?
Oh.
My name is Lydia. I'm coming from Creation Center, and I have just one clarification from you. You mentioned 3 kinds of sins. Can you explain it to us? This is the only question. Then I'm going back because I'm translating. Thank you.
Okay. So the first kind of sin is the kind that everybody knows, do not, whatever it is. That means it's called a sin of commission. You commit an action which your conscience tells you is wrong, and you do it anyway. That's one kind of sin. For example, in Christianity, you have your 10 commandments. Do not do this, kill, steal, covet somebody else's wife, whatever the thing is. So what you should not do. And then you have the sins of omission, that you do not do what you should do. So there are many things that you should do which you don't do, and your conscience will tell you, "Ooh, I should have, done that. I should have helped this person across the street instead of let them get run over by some bus or something." So your conscience is really a very, very good guide, but one of the difficulties that I observe is that many people regularly go against the voice of conscience, and therefore you don't trust your conscience. So there's a whole question of why this is so, which is a very, very interesting thing to go into. But the third kind of sin, which very often Baba says, do not give sorrow, do not take sorrow. So the sins of commission and omission are basically do not give sorrow. But do not take sorrow, well, how many people are good at that? Not very many. And partly because it's not in our culture to not take sorrow. It's absolutely there in the culture that you should take sorrow, you see. And all forms of morality are enforced using violence, you see, which is a really strange human piece of behavior. But anyway, God finds humans rather odd, even though they're his children. So he says, don't take sorrow. Somebody gives you, this is a story from Dadi Gulzar, the way she explains this, is if somebody will give you a handful of cow dung, would you take it? Everybody says, of course I wouldn't take it. So, well, if somebody's giving you sorrow, it's equivalent to somebody's offering you a handful of cow dung, so why are you taking it? That means you really need to be soul conscious, need to be virtuous, need to be empowered with all the powers, and you also need to know the knowledge of drama. Because the only reason why somebody's giving you a hard time is because it's their predestined part in drama, which is none of your business. Right? It's very important to realize that other people's performance is none of your business. But you're very moral people, so you make it your business, and in that process get contaminated, which Baba says is optional. There's no need to contaminate yourself. Who says you have to do that? It's just a cultural norm. Otherwise it doesn't have much meaning, you see. So we really have to think about what Baba's telling us in a coherent, intelligent way, so that we're actually able to do what he's telling us, and in the process we make a lot of discoveries, you see. And this is what makes us different from, you can say, a non-BK. You can't really expect a non-BK to not take sorrow, because they have no no information about that. But you're a BK, and you hear it every other day, don't take sorrow, and you say, yes, but they gave me more sorrow than I could withstand. And then Baba will say, well, get with the program. Where is your power of tolerance? Where is your power of accommodation? It should not be just some theoretical thing that you talk to other people about. You have to prove it and demonstrate it, you see? So this is a very useful thing to consider as a piece of dharana. And I think unless you realize that taking sorrow is your sin, you wouldn't bother to not do it. Oh, there's a queue. Yeah, sister, you have to wait your turn.
Pardon?
It's not your turn. There's other people before you. So you give it to them, and then you get your turn on the right. You know the order in which you came, right?
Om
Please.
Shanti.
Om Shanti.
My name is Flavian. I'm coming from Curacao. And Curacao is just a little dot in the ocean in front of the coast of Venezuela, Caribbean. Sister, I have 2 questions. You said that the aim for this program is that we have to know that we have been selected by God, and that we seriously have to think about making the powers and virtues part of ourselves. So I know for myself that I have been selected, but still, not that there is doubt, but I don't feel it like that I have been selected by God. So how can I be more aware of being selected by God? And as we have been teaching here in the family with Brahma Kumaris, that I know I have to make 36 or more virtues and the powers to imbibe them. But as I said before, it is 36. So how to imbibe all those 36 virtues souls? And still Baba is telling us we are number-wise and so on, so on.
Okay, so you notice in your question a few times you said, I know. So, and then you said, yes, but.
Knowing and feeling is different.
Absolutely. Now, what's better? Now, the thing is this. When you feel something, you feel it for a certain period of time. And then after a while, you don't feel it. It's rather like incense. When you first burn it, you can smell it. And then after a while, you can't smell it anymore. The feelings are like that. Sense perceptions are like that. And that they're not really reliable. Because there's variation and kusa, you know. Now, this is why the mind is for sense perceptions. The intellect is for comprehension and analysis. So if you know something, you know it in the intellect. So one of the things Baba has told us is those who have an intellect filled with love for God, they are victorious. And those who have an intellect filled with hatred for God, they never translate it like that, but that's what it really says. Hatred for God, they will be destroyed, you see. So, what you have to decide is whether you are going to trust your capacity to calculate or your sense perceptions. That is what you have to decide. Now, anytime you say, I know, that means your capacity to calculate, the intellect. I know I have been selected by God, but I can't feel it. Well, being selected by God is not a sense perception. You see, it's a realization which you do in your intellect. And so Baba will enable us to feel something that we realize, and then the feeling will vanish. And he is expecting us not to let go of the understanding. But if you say, well, you know, I need to feel it, then you go off in the department of Ravan. So what you need to do is to trust what you know, regardless of whether or not you can feel it. And this is why Raj Yoga is sometimes called Buddhi Yoga, yoga of the intellect. Once you have understood it, don't expect to be able to carry on feeling it. You have to be able to trust what you know, whether or not you can feel it. And if you make that as a policy, you'll be better off. Okay? So, that was one question. What was your other question? Oh, the 36 virtues. Well, 36, you know, in Hinduism, there's lots of sacred numbers, like 21, 3, 9, 8, 63, 42, you know, all these important numbers, and 36 is one of them. 36 means a good amount. Yeah? Now, there's lots of different virtues. If you want to see a list of 36, you'll find them written down on the wall of the History Hall in Pandabhavan, so you can have a look at those and see if you like them. But basically, another way is Shiv Baba is the ocean of virtues. Have you heard that? So he's got tons and tons of different virtues, and in my way of looking at things, he has given lots of gifts to all his sisters and brothers, his daughters and sons, right? And he says to us, okay, you have got some specialities, some virtues, so you should turn within and try to discern what your specialities, your gifts are, and then cultivate them. And there may be some other things that you can see in some of your other brothers and sisters, and that you have to absorb into yourself by observing it. Now, everybody has defects also, and whatever you observe, you absorb. So if you use your two eyes, you will observe people's defects and absorb that. If you use your third eye, you will observe people's virtues and absorb that. So it's again a choice. What do you want? Do you want to contaminate yourself by observing people's defects, or do you want to enrich yourself by observing people's virtues and specialities? It's up to you. But it involves calculation and decision making. So what this is telling you is give due importance to your intellect and cultivate it so that you don't get deceived by your mind. And your mind is the thing which receives sense impressions and feelings. So as being a Latina, you're a Latina, right? Yeah, so 99% feelings and 1% intellect. So you need to go 50-50. Just to be balanced. Baba likes balance, you know. We should not give up our feelings, but we have to make sure that they don't take over and deceive us. So that the thing is that feelings are capable of being deceptive. But if we don't have feelings, we cannot perceive God. So then you would be just a pundit and no connection with Baba, which is worse. So 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. But just keep going and I know I've been selected by Baba, so that's good enough, right? And I know I have to fill with powers and virtues, so just get on with it. And if you can't feel something, tell Baba, I know you're there, but I can't feel you, because obviously you're invisible and discarnate, so you can't feel invisible, discarnate people, can you? So not to worry. Yes, please.
Om Shanti, I'm Natasha from Boston, US. My question is, I'm a psychotherapist, and so I see clients, individuals, and I do groups. So I'm new, and I'm learning to just not take home everything, and so you have to be there, you be in the moment and show empathy. But from what I learned today about the third sin, there's probably a huge part of it, I'm taking a lot of sorrow. So any yuktis on that?
I think the best yukti for not taking sorrow is to give someone from the depth of your heart full permission to perform their predestined role. Did you hear that? Give permission from the depth of your heart to these other souls to perform their predestined role. There's nothing you can do about it. Just give them permission. I heard something the other day from Dr. Nirmala. She said, this person, he says to the thief, carry on stealing, because you're a thief. And he says to the security person, catch the thief. I thought that was brilliant. That's really the detached observer. So I think that that's one to remember.
So I've been practicing, I'm Vandana from Washington, D.C. I've been really practicing this do not take sorrow or give sorrow. It used to be easier when you come first to Raj Yoga. It seems it gets harder when you move forward. And I realized, one thing that I do want to do is, in order to not take sorrow, is not to give sorrow is not to take sorrow, because I saw myself giving sorrow from taking the sorrow. My question is, in our mind, how do we know when we're not being accurate for our own selves? What's a yukti to catch ourselves? I know you talked about consciousness and to watch it, but it's not...
I did not.
Okay.
I talked about conscience.
Conscience,
Different. Listen to the voice of conscience and calculate how many times per day you go against your conscience. And then calculate why. And then you will be okay. It's a very important exercise. Most people go against their conscience because it's easier and cheaper. It's very expensive to listen to the voice of conscience.
So is that a method to stay accurate?
That is a very good method.
And I had another question. It's kind of related. Raj Yoga is a very solitary path. Almost like it sometimes feels like I might as well have gone to the mountaintop instead of sitting in a gathering.
Welcome to the mountaintop.
That's what I told my colleagues where I'm going.
Because you're in it for the long haul. Daddy Prakash Mani used to say, eat 5 bananas a day, because a banana is akela, which means alone. So you came alone, you know, you are alone, you do what you do alone, and you leave alone. And that's the reality. So to just be okay with that. It is said in the Gita somewhere, ekant priya. So God loves the one who loves solitude, because it's in solitude that you move aside from people, places and things, and then you come close to God. So it's okay, but we have classmates, because otherwise if you're too solitary, as in United States prison system, you can go mad. You've got to be very strong and grounded to handle solitude. So Baba gives us classmates. Okay, we're coming up to 11, so I'm going to give...
Thank you.
Welcome.
Om Shanti. I'm Veronica from Montenegro. And I'm appreciating a lot of this kind of interpretation of Gita. No, in this case, we understand it's only a purpose to give knowledge. It's in these circumstances, Denise Ben giving Gyan, but the genre as a self-interpretation and decode is very important because of different understanding of the same material or the same texts which people read or information they receive, they understand or interpret it in different way. And now we have to think about criteria, how we can invent the method to interpret a real Gita or true Gita. It's Murli. And there are different signs which have in this position a lot of means for interpretation, such as hermeneutics, discourse analysis, text linguistic, and so on. So, what is our, how to say, purpose to interpret it? It's
let me just tell you this. Every single BK meditates differently.
Yes, and understand.
Everybody's number-wise. You just don't know what your number is. And everybody receives the Murli into their soul individually. So each one is on their own. Baba gives the same Murli to the super Maharatis and the total failures. Same Murli. But it really is up to us what we do with it, how we work with it, and in the end we will get a grade, and then we will say oops or you know, because everything is a risk.
And at the same time, it's the most challenging thing to interpret the author of the Murli, or who is speaking, who is giving.
See, Baba is utterly mysterious. Is he not? He is so deep, it'll take you several lifetimes to, you know, and we've been spending 63 births trying to find him. Then we spend the whole confluence age trying to see whether he really is the one we found, and who is he anyway, and who am I anyway, and what's going on anyway. And that's what keeps us in Gyan for a whole lifetime. It has to be interesting. Okay?
Yes, but it's something which we can't, with scientific or on the level of
No, this
interpretation.
is totally non-scientific. This is subjective, non-scientific.
But the genre is a genre of Murli is argument, because nearly each sentences of the Murli arise some, how to say,
Exactly.
some opposition, you know.
But that's up to the individual, you see. So you're giving us your approach, I'm giving you my approach, and then we see what anybody likes. And I'm going to play the next episode now, okay?
And my opinion is it's very important, how to say, it's
Definitely, very important.
to interpret it, because in all religions, priests, they interpret
every single
their,
Christian is different from every next Christian. Every single Muslim is different from the next Muslim, you know, because souls are very individual. And this is a drama, and the big question is, who are you? And so let's move on. Okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, a very warm welcome to episode number 7 of the Gita Decoded. As you know, we are going through each and every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita to try and understand what God's message is to humanity. Sister Denise, welcome to episode number 7.
Thank you.
I'm sure by now the audience is quite captivated because you have a very fresh approach to understanding this ancient scripture. Sister Denise, I'm going to take you back to on what is in my book, page 39 or paragraph 39, because it contains so much, and I think it's necessary that we go through it line by line. This insight is wisdom as declared in the theory of Sankhya. How do you understand this? And Sister Denise, I noticed that in the English it's Sankhya, but in the Hindi text, which I do not speak but which you do, it's written as Samkhya.
Yeah, this is just a matter of the transliteration system, so not to worry about it, and the pronunciation, all that. There are people who give a lot of importance in the correct pronunciation, but here we're really focusing on the meaning. And Samkhya is one of the traditions of Hindu philosophy that refers to Gyan Yoga, and this is called the yoga of knowledge. And so Sankhya is all about the method of reason, that this is how you arrive at enlightenment, is through the process of reasoning, which is sometimes called buddhi yoga, the yoga of the intellect, or the yoga of knowledge, which is differentiated from other aspects of yoga that you find in the Gita. For example, the subsequent chapter will be talking about karma yoga, which is different. So Raj Yoga actually encompasses so many different ways to God, and the way of Samkhya, the way of knowledge, is deep, because you have to have a very refined intellect to understand these things and really grasp it to the point of being able to have a knowing, not just intellectualized, but a deep knowing.
Sister Denise, you know, if you look at what the world has become, we do not necessarily apply our minds to ourselves and to life and to other people as we should. And it can be argued that most people have become very superficial, okay? Whether they acknowledge it or not, because we live on the surface, as it were, and not go deep. The Bhagavad Gita invites one to a much deeper level, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, and what does this depth promise the reader?
It's scary for people to have to go really deep inside, because they're not used to it. We live in a very materialistic world. People are in a state that we in Brahma Kumaris call body consciousness. You live on the surface of your body, and it's only about sense perception, objects of the senses, and what the Gita is saying, that all that is really delusion, illusion, and what is real is something that has to be perceived through the third eye. So when you go deep inside, you also go closer to your subconscious. And I think one of the functions of yoga, one of the functions of lining up your mind with the mind of God, is that it causes all sorts of things to change on the inside. And that's a bit of a upheaval, and hence you also have the inner war, which is in a way exacerbated by the study and practice of Raj Yoga, because as long as you can keep everything sort of tamped down and under the rug, you can pretend it doesn't exist. But as soon as you start to have yoga, you're calling it to the conscious awareness from the subconscious, because you can only really deal with it when you have it in your conscious mind.
Now, Sister Denise, you mentioned a phrase that is going to be brought up later, but because you mentioned it now, I think it's worth further exploration, opening the third eye.
Yes.
This is what God is doing to Arjuna for Arjuna, his friend?
Well, one of the epithets of God, one of the names of God, is the bestower of the third eye. And it's also said that it is the divine eye, and it's also called the eye of knowledge. So what that means is that you're able to see, in the sense of understand, things that are very subtle, that are non-physical, that are out of the range of normal perception. And because God is non-physical and non-human, it's so difficult for people to deal with God, and mostly the feeling is that God is by definition inaccessible and incomprehensible. But here in the Gita you have a very different approach, where God says, I'm talking, now listen. And what he says doesn't really fit with what people normally think, because how people think is on the basis of their extrapolations and interpretations of their observation of sense perceptions. Whereas God is not talking about something that you can perceive through the senses, but a different level of reality which is more real. And so it's a different thing.
Also on page 39, we covered this in the previous episode, but it's such a vast subject, I thought we'd take it up again at the beginning of this particular episode. The expression is used, yoked with this determination, Arjuna, you shall rid yourself of the bondage of karma. That is a very descriptive term. Bondage means you're literally chained. So what does this mean to you, and how exactly does the theory of Sankhya help the soul to rid itself of a karmic debt?
I'm reminded of the very famous expression from John Locke, an English philosopher, who says man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. And these are really the chains of karma, chains of karmic accounts. And this is why part of Raj Yoga is the study and application of the theory of karma, the philosophy of karma. Because you see, when you do an action, karma is action, so when you do an action which is based on false awareness, that action causes you to be in bondage. When you do an action based in what we call body consciousness, you come into karmic debt with another person. You start to perform negative actions, and you come into debt, so then you have to repay, so you are bound to a person. Sometimes people find they're bound to particular individuals, particular places, particular circumstances, and you can't get away. So there is also then the question of karma and destiny. So they come in. Because your destiny is fixed, but yet it's fixed by how you are. You're the type of person that you are, and the type of person that you are will dictate what kind of action you will choose to perform. And then the question arises, to what extent is there free will? And that's a very much of a question under consideration, you know. But what the purpose of the study and practice of Raj Yoga is to know exactly what kind of karma puts you in bondage and exactly what karma takes you out of bondage, and then also how your shifting of your karmic relationships from being indirect with God and direct with people, places and things to direct with God and indirect with people, places and things, because through that you get another kind of karma which is called neutral karma.
I see. So Denise, the next stanza that one comes across is the reader is informed that if you make this effort, not a single ounce of this effort is lost, and the words are, even a little bit of this discipline protects one from great danger. What is the danger being referred to, and how is it that, why is this effort so important?
Well, you know, the word for effort is purusharat.
Say that again, please.
Purusharat. I'm not sure how good my pronunciation is, but anyway. Purusharat is a word that we use a lot in Brahma Kumaris to refer to what you do as an individual to move yourself from your current state to a better state. So Purusharat, if you break down the word, you can look at it as Purush, which means a person. Usually it's considered to mean a man, but otherwise it means a person, could be male or female, because it refers to the soul, which is genderless anyway. And then arat, you can understand that to mean something like for the sake of. So any act that you do for the sake of yourself is going to produce a fruit which is good for you. And even if it doesn't work, the fact that you're trying, the fact that you're putting in that time and effort with a sincere heart, in the understanding that this is what God wants for you, there is going to be fruit of that that's going to come to you. So it's a very different kind of effort from the way one strives to gain some personal achievement in the worldly sense, where your achievement will be short-lived and you will enjoy it and then it'll disappear. A spiritual effort is different because it stays with you also for a very long time.
Mr. Denise, I find this expression particularly curious and thought-provoking, for it goes, there is only one path for him who knows, but there are many paths for him who does not know. How would you define this? What image comes to mind is a maze,
yes,
a labyrinth. Yeah.
Well, take a look at the world today. There are countless religions, countless approaches to reality through science, through all kinds of ways. And I think a lot of people feel that any of them are just as good as any other one. And I think people will be inspired to chop and change. But on the other hand, if there is what we call this expression, recognition of God, you know, if you recognize God and you recognize that the voice that you're hearing, the instruction that you're getting has to come from God, then there's no substitute. If you don't recognize, then everything looks the same. So I think it's to do with that, whether you recognize or you don't recognize. You get it or you don't get it. You see or you don't see.
Okay. Are there those who choose not to see, even though they may be presented with an understanding?
Well, I
I'm
don't
going to
know.
qualify. Sorry, Sister Denise, I want to qualify my question. There are some who cannot understand. There are those.
Yes.
Okay. So,
But there are a lot of people who think they know. but maybe they don't. But they believe they do. And so they're closed because of that. If you have somebody who really knows, who really gets it, who really sees, and who really does the work and crosses the mileage and actually goes forward spiritually, it's pretty visible. So people around them, especially those who are in a spiritual practice, they will know this one understands. But you can't make a person understand who isn't able to. And if somebody understands, you can't stop them from understanding. It doesn't matter how many barriers you put, which is interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so we come to a very interesting part of chapter 2, and I'm going to read the text itself so that you can tell us what it means to you. The Vedas are such, it says, that their scope is confined to the 3 qualities. Be free from those 3 qualities, Arjuna, indifferent towards the pairs of opposites, eternally fixed in truth, free from thoughts of acquisition and comfort, and possessed of the self. Mr. Denise, in my translation, the word self is written with a capital S. What is this particular text mean?
You see, you have 4 Vedas, and they're a little different from each other, but basically they describe to a Hindu many different ways of practicing Hinduism. Rituals, contains the philosophical angle, the Vedic tradition, and so on. So it's, according to the Gita, it's got its own limits. So it puts people into a tricky situation, really, because, I mean, there's a lot of people who think, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, within which there is the Gita, are legends, epics, and then the Vedas, they will put it higher, and the Upanishads and all of this. More philosophical, more academic, but yet within the Gita, which I think is really the most ancient one, it's saying don't be fooled by those who put those academic angles in a higher position, because they're actually limited. And again, we've got another contrast, which is the Gita purports to be spoken by God, who is non-human. The Vedas, Upanishads, these are collections of philosophies which are created by humans. And so, from a human perspective, this which is said to come from God may not come from God. But from God's perspective, God knows who God is, and knows that in comparison with himself, the human intellect is by definition limited and subject to corruption, and is therefore of a lower order. So there are just these 2 angles which are, in a sense, unresolved in the public mind.
I wondered, how does this relate to the way one manages one's own power?
The question of power is the most intriguing, because I think that, of course, God is known to be the Almighty, the Omnipotent, and of a completely different order from anyone else. And I think what God is doing by speaking the Gita is conferring power on Arjuna, and Arjuna has to know how to handle power, and as long as he is ruled by his emotions and his loyalty to conventional morality, he's not ready to handle power. And there are also phrases which say that the yogi, or the person who is able to be, who is able to manage their sense perceptions, they are ready for immortality.
You said that God gives Arjuna power?
Well, when you give knowledge, you're giving power. When knowledge is power.
Okay. One has to read between the lines to get that. That doesn't appear from the text.
Well, when you go deep, you realize that, you see, what God is saying to Arjuna is, you have the potential to be invincible, but you're prevented from doing that by your humanness. So go beyond that, and then you come and become a divine person.
Okay, so Sister Denise, we've come to the most, one of the most interesting stanzas in the entire book, which reads as follows: Your right is to action alone, never to its fruits at any time. Never should the fruits of action be your motive. Never let there be attachment to inaction in you. Now, the meaning, if one applies one's mind's, the meaning, if you apply your mind to it, is that you should do something and not expect something in return. But Sister Denise, I want you to give me in your answer, how does one apply this practically? If I hand over to somebody a glass of water, in my heart I expect a thank you. Not buy me a diamond necklace in return. That's not what I expect. But then, and here it is. If it is human nature that if you do not get some acknowledgement for things that you do, you stop doing it.
Well, this is the thing. You have human nature, which, as you rightly described, assumes a give and take and acknowledgement and so on. But in the practice of Raj Yoga, you want to get beyond your karmic involvement with other people. And you
hold on. There's one of those bombs that you just dropped. Say that again.
The Gita is saying that you need to come out of your karmic involvement with people. So you want to begin to have a karmic involvement with God. Now, a normal human being, right? A regular person, a normal person is engaging with other human beings because that person may well believe in God, but doesn't know God, doesn't have a direct interaction with God. Is not possible because God is outside the range of that normal person. And what keeps God outside the range of a normal person is this attachment to the fruit of action. So when God says to Arjuna, you must act, but you must not expect the fruit. Do not act in order to get a fruit. Just do the right action and let it be enough. Because when you have the yoga of knowledge, you know the philosophy of karma. So your main focus is do the right thing. Whether you get a good result or not, that happens in the immediate future, is in a way none of your business. You have to know the knowledge of the philosophy of karma. So you do the right action, and you are making an investment in yourself. When you make an investment which is very long term, the fruit that you get is very enormous. And once you start to do action in relationship with God, you are what's known as you're following Shrimat. So the Gita is called Shrimat Bhagavad Gita. Shrimat means the supreme directions. So follow the directions of God, knowing that they will lead to very, very good fortune. God is known as Bhagwan, the fortune maker. So just follow the directions. Don't think about what's going to happen, because that makes you human again, ordinary again, normal person again, and it moves you away from your effort to become more divine. So this is why we have to leave the fruit of action. That's not what it's about. We talked earlier about the castes.
Yes.
And the one who is the merchant caste is always thinking about, what am I going to get out of this? Which means that person is a lower quality human than the one who does the right thing because it's right.
Okay, this is Denise. You described somebody who does something and wants something back in return. That encapsulates almost the entire human population. That's what we have become. That's what we have become. We want to be acknowledged. We want to be validated. I once heard it said that the worst feeling a human being can have is to feel invisible. If you do something, no one knows you exist. You feel as you feel as if, what is the point of being alive? Okay, if you're not seen and not heard. Okay, so here's the reader who really loves God, who thinks this Bhagavad Gita is a magnificent scripture. I want to become this. If you find yourself in that position, which, like I said, is the entire human population, but you want to ameliorate yourself, you want to lessen your karmic burden, how do you make the transition from here to here? The Bhagavad Gita is, here, and you are here. That's what happens, isn't it? You look at this book and think, this is exactly what I'm not. Okay? How do you rise? Explain how you climb up that ladder, having fallen.
We're looking at the chapter on knowledge. So, in this chapter, you rise by really deeply paying attention to, thinking about, cogitating about. You have to really understand the knowledge. And the knowledge is the soul is what's real. And when the soul performs an action, if that is a pure action, the soul will be benefited. And if it's an impure action, the soul will go into loss. And that is all you need to be aware of. And if you are looking for something from another human being, that means you're giving away your power. And that means you're not doing Raj Yoga anymore. Raj Yoga means the yoga through which you become the king. And a king does not ask somebody for approval or validation or anything like that. The king knows, I am the king. The king knows, I did a pure action, there will be a good result. You don't look for feedback. That is not your level, you see. If you're down, you're looking for feedback because you have fundamental doubt in yourself. But by really studying this, you come to a point where you know who you are and what you are. And if you don't, I mean, if you say you do, but you act like you don't, it means you don't. So the way of rising is to actually get it. That's what we were talking earlier. Some people get it, some people never get it. They will say, yes, but, and go back to the old thing, you see. But somebody who gets it will stop in their tracks and say, come again? Would you say that again? Oh, this, all right. And their whole consciousness is shifting, which you'll find in the Gita is the word smriti. You see,
which means?
Smriti means awareness, but you'll find in your translation that it's generally translated as memory. So, I mean, one of the difficulties with the Gita is that any translation is an interpretation, and the interpretation is determined by the fundamental philosophy of life of the translator, because if the translator doesn't get it, you won't either. So what is in the original text is the material that you try to work with, because then you have a number of different possibilities. Like, for example, in the stanza that you just read, akarma is translated as non-action. But in Brahma Kumaris, we would not translate akarma to be non-action. We would translate it as neutral action. That means action which does not put you in profit or loss. And there is that type of action.
So thank you, Sister Denise, for joining us today. Like I said, I expected to do more than 3 pages, but the answers were so deep and powerful that I thought it best that you, the viewer, get as much information as possible as to what the Bhagavad Gita means by the terms of the theory of Samkhya, the bondage of karma, and also what it means to have knowledge, what it means to have this wisdom, what do you do with it, and how you empower yourself with it. I also like to know how to apply that which is written in this ancient text to our practical life. And Sister Denise has been kind enough to give us some realistic examples. If you are in a state where you're not sure you understand, then I invite you to stay tuned for the next episode, where we will explore chapter 2 further. So Sister Denise will be able to share with us what the full message is that is contained in chapter 2, including what is meant by the 3 gunas. So thank you for joining us, and thank you, Sister Denise.
Thank you.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Om Shanti. So you can see that it's going deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think one of the reasons that we did this as a series of videos is so that any of us can look at it again. The book that we used is a very academic translation of the Gita. So you just have the Sanskrit, you have the transliteration, you have the dictionary with many different possible meanings of the different words, and then you have the translator's interpretation, but you can always do it your own way because you have enough information. And it doesn't hardly give any comments, you see, and that's why we chose this, because we just need to have the basic information. And we are looking at it from the angle of BKs. Which means that we're all aware of Baba's knowledge. And for many BKs, to have Baba's knowledge out of context is to do Raj Yoga in a bubble in the sky. And so one of the reasons that we did this is to bring it down on earth and to put it in context. You see, when you are reading Murlis, you will find, if you really know the Gita, that there are many phrases of the Gita that come in the Murli, but if you don't know, then you won't know that that's what it is. And there are different references to different scriptures. You know that the caste that Brahma Baba came from in Sindh, in that particular community, the religion that they practice involves studying the Gita and the Guru Granth Sahib, and so you have a lot of references to the Sikh scriptures as well. And particularly when you hear Dadi Ratan Mohini reading the Murli, she will very often make these quotations from the Guru Granth Sahib. So even though she was only 8 years old when she came into Gyan, or 9 or something like that, but still they're very, very aware of these traditional phrases that their parents and grandparents will teach them. And so the way that Baba explains knowledge to people is by going to where they are and then bringing them to where he is, you see. Because if you just drop something from out of nowhere, people don't have any way to connect it. Now, when you are a person who's raised in the West, you don't have any of these connectors, and therefore they need to be created. And there are a lot of people who will take it upon themselves to actually study all these scriptures and be able to put together the references. And that's actually quite useful because it allows you to contextualize it in your own cultural background. So what happened in Europe, not in America, not in Australia, but in Europe, in the 17th and 18th centuries, is the intellectual community studied Indian philosophy, and it entered into the literature, the poetry, the music, the arts. And so people who have that cultural background in Europe have a lot more of these bridges than people in US or Australia who don't have that in their cultural historical background. So depending on how you want to study this, you have to select what's important to you. And as we heard in the earlier discussion, you know, we all come from a different space, we all come from a different place, we all have our different cultural backgrounds, we're all educated differently, we all come from different family traditions and so on. But regardless of that, I think every single Brahmin, BK, needs to contextualize what this is so that they can, on the one hand, explain it to people who have a similar background, and on the other hand, explain it to themselves, you see. Because if you say, okay, well, I'll just kind of stop and turn into a BK just like that, it won't work. It'll work for a while, but it won't work indefinitely, because you have to make the bridges. And Baba shows us exactly how to do that by bridging between Gyan and Hinduism. And then we have enough information in the Murlis, in the classes and so on, for us to be able to make additional bridges to our own background, culture, philosophical tradition, psychological personality type, and so on and so forth, you know. And so I think that this is quite helpful. The target audience for these things is partly BKs, because not all BKs have access to this kind of background information. And the other target audience is those people in the Western world who are well educated and cultured, to enable them to also make a bridge, because otherwise to relate to BK is quite a jump, you know. And a lot of people just they can't relate. They just say, there's nothing to do with me, you know. So we have to show people that, yeah, it is to do with you, and here are the bridges that you can cross so that you can go backwards and forwards between a spiritual practice of Raj Yoga as taught at Brahma Kumaris and whatever your cultural, religious background is. So that is also something I wanted you to know about. So does anybody want to come up and ask any questions or make any comments? If so, just please come up to the front. We have a mic, And any other people, you can come and sit on that sofa over there, and it's closer.
So the Gita is really about Arjuna having the self-doubt and putting his bow down. And
Well, you might want to say that, but it may not be that.
okay, for me, I'm interpreting it as maybe that's very strongly coming out to me right now, that it's his self-doubt made him put his bow down and say, I can't do this.
Well, that's in the first chapter.
Yes. But I thought that was how it starts, the entire Gita.
Well, the entire Gita does not start there. No. But anyway, what's your question?
My question, so, because I'm struggling with the self-doubt issue, and so forgive me if I'm going to be a little direct.
That's what we want. We want you to be direct.
And Baba in his Murli is constantly reminding us and cautioning us about doubt. How do you overcome if you even have self-doubt?
Okay, good question. Self-doubt. So self-doubt can sometimes come up in the expression, why me? You know? How come Shiv Baba chose me? Because I'm just a basic nothing, you know? And can I really do this? And am I really an ex-Indian deity? And, you know, because it's a big leap of faith, so that's very normal. As you know, in our study, Brahma Kumaris Raj Yoga study, we hear about 3 kinds of faith. And then Baba introduced a 4th kind of faith. So we have 4, in fact. The first one is, of course, faith in the self, which means the first of Dadi Janki's 3 Om Shantis. You know, who am I? And it's very, very easy for us to grasp, what am I? I'm a soul, 84 births, blah, blah, blah. That's easy. But who am I is much more difficult. So, acquiring faith in the self is a process that takes the totality of your Brahman life, and you might even get another Brahman life in which that continues to happen. So I think it's quite important not to put expectations of having total faith in yourself and knowing yourself totally in 5 minutes. This is not that kind of thing. It is a process that takes your entire life. And you're doing this in the context of having been a high-quality devotee for 63 births. You see, so you cannot think of yourself as just what you present in this little incarnation where we are at our lowest, at our most ignorant, at our most contaminated, and at our stupidest, you know. So it's a process. We have to have patience. The second faith is we have to have faith in Baba. And usually people say, oh, well, it's easy to have faith in Baba because he's God. But you will get tests of faith. And I think most of the tests that we get are tests of faith. And the whole issue of faith is a huge subject, you know. What really is faith? What do I mean by faith? What does it mean to have faith or not have faith? And there's a number of different expressions that come in the Murli that help us because we have to churn it really deeply. Then the third faith is, of course, faith in drama. That everything that happens in the drama must be accepted as being very good. you see. And that goes totally against every aspect of your training in morality, ethics, and values, which is one of the reasons why I encourage people to give up those three things and replace them with virtues and powers. And that takes a whole lifetime, and most people don't agree with me on that anyway. But I think it should be that way. Then the fourth faith is you have to have faith in the BKs, the other BKs. And trust, you see. And then you say, well, how can I trust this person who's obviously dishonest or whatever, has betrayed me or is about to betray me or whatever? So it's a very, very different way of thinking about what it means to be a human being, and for yourself and for other people. And how we look at reality is totally, totally different. You see, the person who is teaching us is a non-human. Shiv Baba is not a human being, you see. And most people, they anthropomorphize God, which means they consider him to be some sort of human. And they infer feelings in him that he doesn't have, motivations in him that he doesn't have, because they think he's just another kind of human. He's a non-human. And then you yourself, your father is a non-human. So, you know, you're slightly less human than you thought. Your mother, Brahma Baba, is an avyakt angel, so which makes you somewhat less human. So your body consciousness is what makes you human. And then as you pursue this, and there are many, many different phases of being a BK. You know, Daddy Janki says, well, I've been a BK for 80 years. There's not too many who can say that, because you've got to be really old to be able to say that, and you've got to have started in the beginning. So she's absolutely unique, but what it means is she has been there for every phase of the BK world, and we've only been there for some of it. You know, I've been a bit more than 40 years, so that's half of it, you know, but still you don't know the half of it, you know. So we have to be patient, and Daddy very often mentions this, that if you want to do this, you have to have utmost patience with the Gyan, utmost patience with yourself, utmost patience with the drama, which is hardly ever doing what you want it to do. And then all of this is very mysterious because it's very subtle, you see. And so we are students all the way until we die. And still there is more to learn, more to realize, and go deep and deep and deep. So this is good, because otherwise we'd say, okay, I've done Raj Yoga, that's it, now what? You see. And so it is so deep that even the most intelligent, purest, most deep person is still learning until that end time. And so for the rest of us, definitely there's more and more and more to know. You have a question. Do we have any people who haven't asked questions who want to say something? Yeah, let me have you first, because we already heard from the brother.
Shanti, I'm Karen from the Philippines. You said that the more you do yoga, the subconscious becomes conscious. And I experienced that. The beast and the beauty comes out. And, well, and then you said also, you use the powers to defeat the beast. But is there any way where you can just merge the subconscious and it doesn't come out?
No. You want it to come out. Of course it's hard. It's supposed to be hard, but you've been supplied with weaponry. Have you seen these pictures of the Indian goddesses with plenty of weapons? Yeah? That's you. you know, and so you have all these demons in your subconscious, and the purpose of Raj Yoga is to encourage them to come out so that you can kill them. Because you can't kill things in your subconscious, you can't see it. So you want it to come out, and then you take your different weapons and you kill it. And then you say, okay, that's good, next. Because there's quite a few of them down there. And this is why we're also called spiritual warriors, you know, and our war is to neutralize this polarization that exists within us of the completely pure self and the completely impure self, and we have to embrace both sides, you see, and we have to arrive at a state of victory where we are not in the least bit perturbed by any monster that comes along. We just go snap and it's neutralized, and we don't mind it, you see. Otherwise, you know, everybody's got the shame and guilt and all this business, you see. And this is again why I would say you really need to dispense with all this morality, because it's very counterproductive. You know, one of the things that Baba says is, I have come to destroy all the sort of religions, the body-conscious religions, or religions of the body, and to establish true religion. You see, so the false religions would be those that operate on the basis of thou shalt not this or that, you know, punishment, finger wagging, and any of that business. We might as well go back to pre-Gyan for that. Gyan is not about that. Gyan is about coming to terms with all the different aspects of yourself and being neutral and totally accepting every part of yourself, you see. And so when a big demon comes up to come and scare you, you just neutralize it and make it into a little mouse. Give it some cheese and off we go. Do you see what I'm saying? Acha. One more person over here put their hand up. No? Okay, then brother, please.
Thank you, sister. I just wanted to complete my thought, or complete the question from last time. You mentioned in accordance with the caste you are born into is assumed to be according to your karma?
Well, you see, in India there is the caste system, and people get born into the caste, it is said, according to their karma. So that's a normal, regular belief in India, yeah?
Is that pertaining to the same, is it linked to what we spoke about in decoding the Gita? Is it linked to, in a way, that with the 63 births that we have with devotee, then we come into a caste in which that would reflect our Brahman life also?
You see, you need to be clear that one thing is caste born and the other is caste by karma. So everybody here is supposed to be a Brahmin, is that right? Now a few of those would be Lokik Brahmins as well as BK Brahmins. And then some people would be what is known in India as outcasts. They come from another religion, so they're not even in the caste system. But Baba says all that is the body-conscious interpretation, and it doesn't apply here. But Baba has done a number of murlis in which he took up this question of what caste are you having become a BK? And so we say, well, I'm definitely a Brahmin. Well, in that case, look at your behavior. and see if your behavior corresponds to, the description that is given of a deity, ahimsa, paramo dharma, and complete with all the virtues and completely viceless and so on and so forth. If we have all of those characteristics, which are described as the characteristics of a deity, which is another caste, right? But there's no deities now because there just aren't any. So from Baba's angle, all the people, regardless of what caste they say they're born into, they're all Shudras, you see, and then that's going to shock people enormously if you tell them that, so don't tell them that. But bear in mind that anyone who's really body conscious, hedonistic, full of all the vices, blah, 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 from God's angle, that's a Shudra. And you see, we have this expression, Sato, Rajo, Tamo, right? The three gunas, which was mentioned in the video, but we didn't go into much in the next episodes. But so in the Raja Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, he talks about Sato, Rajo, Tamo in a certain way, but then Baba talks about it in a different way. So a sattvic BK, you see, you're following all the principles, the maryadas, you're doing all the practices that we do. Okay, that's on the physical level. Now, how are you handling things emotionally? Have you reached the point of virtue and power where you do not experience negative emotions? You see, if you have, then you're really getting towards being a Sato Pradhan BK, your karmatit, you see. So we start off not at all karmatit, and we're trying to become karmatit. So as you move through, you can see in some murlis, Baba says you haven't even become Rajo, let alone Sato, you see. And then you have to go back to the drawing board and take a look at yourself, your personal stage, and see with rigorous honesty, how am I doing? You see, and then you can appreciate that this process that Baba's taking us through is so total and at such a high level that surely we do need a whole lifetime to do it, you see. And, you may come into Gyan in your 20s, and then by the time you're 80, you're still striving. That means you've got a lot of experience along the way, and a lot of people, they experience that their progress is like, half a centimeter after 30 years, and then they may say, oh, I give up, and Baba said, don't give up. Keep going, and trust that He is going to take you where you need to go. And I think sometimes we may question it too much and find ourselves giving up because we question it too much, and then we argue ourselves out of carrying on, and that would be quite a mistake. So it's very good to say, okay, I'm in it for the long haul. Being a person who doesn't have expectations of the self, let alone anyone else, is really useful. It puts us really in trouble when we find that our expectations are not fulfilled. And of course, it's easy to come in Gyan, very difficult to stay in Gyan. There's lots of first-timers. Every time Baba comes, there's, more than 3/4 of the hall is first-timers. What happened to second-timers, And how few people are just, they get through the hurdles, the obstacles, and they say, well, I don't care, I just love Baba, and let's go. You see, so that faith plays a good part. You just have faith. Practically, it's good if you have a bit of blind faith in yourself. Baba says, I'm a deity soul, so I must be, you know. So if you're slightly innocent in that department, that's sort of useful. Because if you're too intelligent, you'll just give up. So faith is very good. Patience is very good. And trust the process is very good. Yeah. Anyone else have anything they would like to ask or share or yeah? That's it? Oh, please, yes.
Margaret Parker, Australia. Sometimes in the Murli, Baba talks about the Bhagavad and the Gita as separate things. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, it's complex, right? There's the thing called the Srimad Bhagavad Gita with a D, and then there's the Bhagavad with a T. And Bhagavad is different. So the Bhagavad is many, many volumes known as the Charitra. The Charitra is the stories of Krishna, how he stole the butter and how he stole the clothes of the gopis when they went swimming, and how he had 16,108 wives, and how he killed a snake and got bitten and turned blue-black, and all these stories. So the Bhagavad is really the memorial of the history of Shiv Baba with the BKs, and in particular the early years, you see. So then the Srimad Bhagavad Gita is the knowledge, you see. So that's the difference. And in India, you know, it's a good thing to have many reincarnations, because there's so many scriptures, you need several lives to read them all. Yeah. It's very long and complicated. But you see, in the traditional days, that's all there was agriculture, and then at night, stories around the fire, you see. And in the Golden Age, they have poets who, you know, describe the reign of a certain king or whatever. And so this system, in the West, they call it the bard, the poet who used to, you know, say what's happening. Now we have the BBC and the whatever who do that job. But it used to be someone would tell the stories, the news. And then you have the Upanishads and the Vedas, you see. And you know that in Gyan, Baba tells us that out of the navel of Vishnu, on his umbilical cord, comes Brahma, who is holding the scriptures and the Vedas in particular. So Baba says, I give you the essence of the Shastras. Shastras are always translated in the English Murli as scriptures, but it's not. It just sounds like scriptures, so they write scriptures. But it's Shastras, which is a particular type of scripture. So you have Shastras, Vedas, Upanishads, and Gita, Bhagavad, Mahabharata, Ramayana, you know, tons of stuff. And then you have stories, you know, and if you would read a wonderful set of stories called the Vikramaditya, you won't remember that, but anyway, it's really interesting, because these are moral stories that are totally antithetical to any morality that any of you would have heard of. Completely different. And the usefulness is that you can see the history of morality from long ago times. And all these books, which are supposed to have been written by Vyas, you know, and Vyas was, of course, the grandfather of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, you know, which is also, Vyas is said to be another name for Shiv Baba. So So Shiv Baba has all of these people, some of whom are really good and some of whom are really bad. And then the moralistic people cannot figure out how God would do such a thing, so then they change the history and get confused. So Shiv Baba has an awful lot of untangling to do. And of course he'll come in India where it's most maximum tangled up. And if you can figure out this, you can figure out anything. Or it is said, if you can do Amrit Bela every day, you can do anything. Because the discipline that we learn in Raj Yoga enables us to become concentrated. And Baba told in the Murli today, very interestingly, that your power of concentration is very key and crucial to your success. And concentration is called ekagrata. Ekagrata means the ability to be one and focus on one, which means that your attention is diverted away from all the distractions. And then you kind of disappear into a point of light, and that's the end of the drama. So all of this, what we see and hear and feel and so on, that he says this is an identically repeating thing, you know. It's a three-dimensional movie. Consider it as entertainment. And then you won't get into a conniption about anything. So the stage of consciousness that he's talking to us about, first of all, it takes us a long time to really get what he's saying. And that's okay, we have to be patient with ourselves about that too. And then once we've got it, we can't hold it very long. We'll get it for a second or two and then we lose it. And then we have to do a lot more churning and then get it again. And maybe hold it a little longer, you see. And then Maya is, you know, very, very conscientious, much more conscientious than the BKs, you see. So we do experience very often failure, but failure is a great teacher, so that's okay. And I think the most important thing for us is this whole thing of churning. Because it's by churning the murli that we can extract this juice that really sustains us on our spiritual journey and helps us not to get used up by all the scenes in drama, you know, which are dedicated to stopping us from being BKs. Right? So, my hope is that you enjoyed this and that I have a few little cards of Raj Yoga TV, so if anybody wants one and you can go and look at it. It hasn't been officially launched yet, but it's been running for more than 6 months, so there's lots of stuff on it. And interested in hearing your feedback because we want to know how useful this is as a resource for BKs and maybe your contacts. You know, sometimes BKs say we're really looking for something that we can show other people, which is really solid BK stuff, but which doesn't make it look too strange, too different from the cultural environment that they have come from. So it's designed to be helpful in that way as well. So thank you very much, and let us finish with a few moments of Baba's remembrance. Om Shanti.